when I invite somebody to speak, I take responsibility for introducing them. So here I am. Just to let you know some statistics, there are 2.3 billion Christians on this planet and 2.6 billion Muslims, the two greatest religions. Okay, so the statistics I've seen from multiple sources is that the percentages of Christians is declining while the percentage of Muslims is rising. So we have a few questions here. What's going on? Should we fear or should we understand? I'm for understanding. So 2 times I've seen the speaker at conferences confronting Islamophobia, and he comes from a unique perspective, 2 worlds. He's a Presbyterian minister who's also what I consider an Islamic scholar. So welcome, and we're going to have a question and answer. So if you have questions, hold them, and we'll have some question and answer. Selden, come on up.
And I do appreciate that wonderful call to prayer. That's what it was right there. I was in a mosque on Wednesday night breaking the fast, and the muezzin there could not have done any better than you did. Well done. Thank you. I am certainly very, very glad to be here. And this is probably a different talk on Islam that I give in most places. I go to a lot of churches that want me to come there and tell them why it's an evil, wrong religion. And I shock them when I tell them that I describe myself as the Arabic word as Bini Ibrahim, son of Abraham. The Quran speaks of Christians, Jews, and Muslims as children of Abraham. And I shock them when I tell them that, yes, every day I read the Hebrew Scriptures, I read the New Testament, and I do read the Quran. I also have a special love for the Shias, which is the group that I did my research on. But in a minute I'm going to tell you, I took early retirement at age 55 3 years ago so I could do what I really wanted to do, write books and things like this. Now I feel like this is not a hostile audience here like most places I get. I don't need to argue. In a lot of churches, the KKK will come up, and I refer to them as Christian terrorists, Christian terrorists, Christian terrorists. Finally, someone will say, oh, please, don't judge my own religion on a few people. And I say, well, Muslims say the same thing. I'm going to repeat what the mother who lost a son in Sandy Hook said after Orlando. She said, after my only child was killed, and she can't have any more children because after she had that one child, she had to have her tubes tied. She said, the NRA told us, don't judge every gun holder because of one person, the shooter. She said, I'm going to say the same thing. Do not judge a whole religion because of one person. And at the mosque on Wednesday night, I was eating dinner across from a Muslim who is a neurosurgeon. He talked about how this guy, not only was he struggling with his sexuality, which he clearly was, but he had bipolar disorder, a number of other things. There were problems there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about Islam in the United States, and it has been here for a very, very, very long time, since 1619. And I'm going to come to that in a minute. But just a word about how I got here. I believe that history is written by the winners. And what we have to do is read the history of those who lost. Let me give you a couple of quick things. When I was a child growing up in Blackstone, Virginia, I was born in 1958. My late father was a family practitioner who made house calls, and I went with him every Saturday. And a lot of his patients were elderly African American. So this was about 1962. I was 4. So you can imagine some of those patients were children, or at least grandchildren, of African American slaves. And my father was aware of home remedies they had, things that worked. And he believed for the longest time that mind over matter. But he started studying it, and there were medicinal reasons why these salves and ointments worked. Because it was some of the healing arts that their ancestors had brought from Africa. He took notes. He died, never wrote that book. My younger brother, who is a doctor in Danville, Virginia, has his notes, is going to write the book. I'll tell you right now, I just turned in my first book, and I'm going to come to that a little bit, on the history of the earliest Africans in this country. They were Muslims. And I'm going to come to that in a minute. They've been here for a long, long, long time. I'll tell you a little bit about Malcolm X. Growing as a white man in Southside Virginia, I didn't know about Malcolm X until I was in my 40s. I'm going to come to him in a few minutes. But very quickly, history is written by the winners. 3 quick stories. When I was a graduate student in Scotland, University of St. Andrews, in 1986, I wanted to get my hands on the equivalent of an 8th grade British textbook, right? Found it, looking for the 39 chapters of the American Revolution, the greatest events that sliced bread, right? What do you think I found? 6 pages talking about the rebellion, referring to the Boston Tea Party folks not as patriots, which I learned in my little Virginia history book, but as terrorists. How about that? Because they destroyed British property. Thomas Jefferson, as a traitor, guess they didn't like the Declaration of Independence, who should have been tried, convicted, and shot to death. That's the first thing. Why did they write that? They didn't win. We did. Second, I'm an adjunct professor at Norfolk State University. We're having a wonderful event started in the fall of 2012. It's called 1619. When did we first become Americans? We have descendants of Africans, of Native Americans, and Europeans like myself. And the first year we had it, we had a lunch, and you had to decide which food came from which group. The Europeans were the worst. And I was sitting next to the chief of the Nottoway Indian tribe. I'm from Nottoway County. And she said, "Sel, I see you just shoving down that squash." Everybody likes squash like there's no tomorrow. I said, it's a vegetable, I guess, right? But I love it. And she said, "Do you know where it came from?" I said, "Well, yes, ma'am. The Virginia Indians gave that to us." She said, "But you know where we got it from?" I said, "No, ma'am." She said, "Well, in 1607, when your 3 ships showed up in Jamestown," she said, "by the way, we do not like the word New World. Our world was fine until they came." But she said, "There was living on the banks of the York River," I don't know what the Indian name was, "a resident ambassador to the Nottoway Nation from the Aztec Empire, which you now know as Mexico." I said, "What?" I said, "Yes, and we had an ambassador there. They brought squash to Virginia." See, that's the history you don't know. 3 months ago, I was at the Embassy of the Islamic Republic of the Gambia in Washington, D.C. It's the Senegambia region of West Africa is most of where our African American descendants came. And the ambassador Faye, had a woman there who worked there. She's Gambian, and she did me the honor of reciting her from memory, her ancestry. And I knew this was going to happen, but at 4 points in her, she stopped for 30 minutes and bowed her head. I knew she was going to do this. Do you know what she was doing? She was remembering the ancestors that got snatched, that one day disappeared, that didn't come back, that were stolen and became part of that horrible thing called the Middle Passage, which brought slaves to the New World. That's a history we don't know. And fourth and finally, my wife and I get ready to make a return trip to Cuba in October with the church we served in Austin, Texas. We first went in 1997. Church I served there, we started a partnership with we went legally, we had a license to go. But, you know, we don't know Cuban history here. We just don't. I saw people that didn't have much, but let me tell you what, they were doing a heck of a lot better on race relations than we ever were doing here. I saw people who there was no homelessness and no one was hungry. I'm not sure we had it any better than they did. So that started me on my search to learn the history of people who didn't win. You saw what all my academic background was. Well, and by the way, another thing, Native Hawaiians, love them too. Both of our adult children, our son's 31, our daughter's 28, live and work on Maui. They've been there for 6 years. Our son went out there 7 years ago to work 3 months on an organic farm, never came home. Daughter graduated from Longwood. The economy stank in 2012. She said, well, I'll just go out and hang out with Selden for a while. She never came back. Do you know, there's a friend of theirs who's a Hawaiian woman and who knows the native language. I love. She said, do you know, there's no such word in the Hawaiian language as private beach. I said, we don't notice that. Apparently, you go by the resorts and they're not owned by them. That's because Hawaiians are very communal people. But again, we as basically white Americans, most of us here, would do a good job learning the culture, the history of our African American sisters and brothers and our native populations like Alaskans and Hawaiians. So anyhow, okay. I'm not going to talk about the 5 pillars. I'm not going to talk about fighting in the past. I'm not going to talk about any of that. What I'm going to do is tell you my real passion that happened after I retired after 30 years of the ministry. My wife and I were in Washington in 2012, and we were at the Smithsonian. It was Black History Month, and I went in and I saw on display a copy of the Qur'an written in Arabic. And I read Arabic, and I picked up and said, where did you get this? It looks like someone wrote it by hand. I said, well, came off of a plantation in North Carolina. Well, I'm a historian, and I knew that in 1607, when the Jamestown folks came here, there were no Christians in West Africa. There was no Christianity there until the European missionaries came. They were more interested less in converting people, but more interested in stealing the land and the gold or whatever they could get. But I also knew, too, that in Timbuktu, which is a city in Mali, that was the second seat of learning, second only to Al-Azhar in Egypt and the Shiite houses in Najaf and Kabul, and you and I know now as Iraq. And I thought, well, of course, African Americans who were stolen and came here, because there are 2 national sins as Americans. There are 2 things. Our prosperity, nothing good we did, but when you steal land and keep it, and you steal free labor from West Africa and keep it, you can really boom on to the economic world, can't you? But I knew that also that African Americans are our only American family group who left a home, in this case they were stolen from home, where they had a better quality of living than what they came to here. For example, I'm descended from Scots. They were probably debt collectors, is what they probably were. They're probably so in debt, said, well, let's just get on the boat, go to the New World, and just wipe off that. They probably came, and if you're white, that's true. I mean, if every white person here said their ancestors came over on the 3 ships at Jamestown, you'd need 10 aircraft carriers to carry all those people. It's just not true. Most white people here came from people that were running from the law. That's true. But African Americans had a great life in West Africa. I have been an occasional teacher on Sunday afternoon at an African American mosque on 35th Street in Norfolk. And there's a woman in that mosque who is a direct descendant of Nat Turner. Everybody know who he was? Led a very, very famous slave revolt in South End County. What she told me was, and I'm not using her name because she does not want to attract attention to who she is, but she knew from the oral tradition, which is gospel, it is, she said, now Nat Turner was born here, but his mother and grandmother came from Africa, which meant they were educated. because West African society educated women too. It wasn't just them. And in the research that I did for my book, somebody read the Fatiha. You did. You read the Fatiha. He read chapter 1 of the Quran. One of my sources was of a plantation in Georgia in about 1820, and the women, it's always women that write down what happens, wrote down what, I hate to use the word, I'm not going to use slaves, that the Africans are doing. They're having a worship service. Well, she was trying to write down, and I could tell from the alliteration was what you read in Arabic. Well, the woman's husband found that out and beat the slaves. You know why? He thought what they were doing was they were speaking in tongues, that they were charismatics, which in white America at that time was a no-no. But they weren't. They were having their salat. It was a Friday, which means what? That's daily prayer. And African American, I have, at the Norfolk State Library is the best library. Anybody ever been to it? The new one they have, it is the best library on the planet. You go in there, and you say, where are all the books? You know what? But you see 1 million computer terminals. Well, you can get on that computer. Everything's digital. You can be anywhere in any library in the world. In the world. And I was calling up slave manifests from West Africa, and all the names leaving from what is now the Senegambia region, right where the mouth of the Gambia River dumps the Atlantic Ocean, all Arabic names, not Mandingo, not Wolof, all Arabic names. They were Muslims. Now, what happened was, over time, their Islam, and it's hard to tell for sure, but I would say their Islamic faith kept up well through the 1840s. And then the owners of the plantations, what they did was they made the Africans adopt what I call slate Christianity, which was based on terrible interpretation of the Bible. We won't go into that because everybody can use a holy book to justify their point of view, but I'm not going to do that. But back in the early 2000s, an African American imam named Vernon Fareed. Does anybody know him? He's the imam of the mosque in Norfolk. And me and a rabbi used to do this thing on Cox Cable called Focus on the Faith. I don't know if you ever saw it. When the Cox owners changed, they weren't making any money off of that. What they wanted was for us to fight and argue and beat each other up. We became great friends. And I remember getting a hate mail from someone in Kings Grant, not said, I can't believe you would show up on TV with the two enemies. And I wrote her back. I said, look, I'd love to talk to you about this because I think that this is, and I told her what got me interested in interfaith dialogue. When I was a student at the University of St. Andrews, I was at an interfaith group with Church of Scotland people, they're Presbyterians, and Iranian Shiites. There was a couple there. He was the engineer, the wife Fatima, I remember, I'll never forget her name. She was a medical student who in 1986 really wanted to come to the United States and go to medical school, but she couldn't because of the Iranian Revolution. And in those days, I still had a strong belief in the Trinity, which I don't now, but I could if you read something like quantum theology. What quantum physicists have taught us is that an electron can be in more than one place at once. Did you know? I didn't know that. Well, all of a sudden the Trinity might make a little sense. But most of church doctrine is more geared by political. Does everybody here know who the Gnostic Jesus was? The guy, didn't get in. Good stuff. Well, Muslims know who he is, and they embrace him. They do. But Fatima came up to me, this Iranian woman, said, Sel, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm not going to tell you that God could not reveal God's self, as Trinity. Because if I said that God couldn't do that, she said that I'd have to say that our God, she used that word, there's some things that our God could not do. Isn't that amazing? In other words, she was, and of course, what Islam teaches is there's a great golden tablet in heaven. And, at one point, God revealed the Torah to Prophet Moses, the Injil, the Gospel, to Prophet Jesus, and the Quran to Prophet Muhammad. But then they say, but that's not all there is to God. In other words, there's a whole lot we just don't know. I mean, there's a whole lot, and if you ever meet anyone that says, I know everything there is to know, turn and run, because that means they're wrong. But Vernon Freed and I really kept up over the years, and I really got interested in African American Islam. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the one who founded the Nation of Islam. Now, today there might be 10,000, that's it. But there are at least in the United States 4.3 African American Muslims here who are in the mainstream. There are twice as many of them than there are Presbyterians. And they are loyal U.S. citizens, and our African American Muslim community are our hope for interpreting what true Islam is, and they're doing it. The oldest mosque in the United States is called Masjid Mohammed. It's in Washington, 77 years old. It was founded by Elijah Muhammad. Well, Elijah Muhammad had a son named Imam Warith Muhammad, and I had him to King's Grant several times. He is the leader of the 4.3 million African American Muslims in the country. He parted with his father, the Nation of Islam, because he believed that Islam was for everyone, and that is the message of the Quran. It's not just the message to Muslims; it's the message to the world. Now, Warith Muhammad, this is interesting, encouraged Malcolm X to go on the Hajj. And at this point, Malcolm X was still preaching black militantism, but he went on the Hajj. And from the Hajj, Malcolm X wrote a letter called A Letter from the Hajj. Anybody here ever read it? It's a shame, because it is a masterpiece in American religious history. Google it and read it this afternoon. Here's what Malcolm X said. I was wrong. I was wrong to say that white people, brown people, yellow people are evil. Here I am in Mecca, eating from the same plate as white men, drinking from the same cup as yellow men. I was wrong. And then he said, he didn't say all of America needs to become Muslim. He said, and this is my mission, America needs to understand this religion. And he was right. That got him killed. That got him assassinated. That, as all peacemakers ultimately do get killed. But I have seen pictures of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King together days before Malcolm X was assassinated. And if Malcolm X had not been assassinated, I just wonder how the history of race relations would have been. Man, I loved it this past week, watching that sit-in in the House of Representatives. Did you see that? Where John Lewis and James Clyburn, two icons of the civil rights movement, had a sit-in Congress about this gun violence thing. And, that gives me hope. It really does. But anyhow, but Malcolm X, if you know African American Muslims, most of them are converts of Christianity, but they're not just getting in touch with their African roots. This is very genuine. But here's why they're so critical. Because all the African American Muslims I know understand the Old and the New Testament. And the Prophet Muhammad said you really cannot understand the Quran unless you also understand the Old and the New Testament. And that's true. If you read the Quran, you are thinking about stuff you do know in the Old and the New Testament. We should never pass judgment, but you see, the Saudis don't know. They don't know that background. And when people ask me, so what would you describe your academic expertise in? I said, here's what I am. I am a scholar of Islamic history prior to becoming the Prophet Muhammad. And what that means is, is I have come to believe that all religions in many ways, but certainly Christianity and Judaism, point towards, I think, the Quran, which is the final revelation. And if you really, really read the Quran with an open eye, and it's better for you to read it than for someone like me to tell you about it. You just need to read it and let God direct you, for how it is. Now, people ask me, well, gosh, why don't you convert? Are you a Presbyterian Shia? Is that what you are? And maybe, I don't know. But in my Presbyterian roots, see, Presbyterians, and most Presbyterians don't know this. Megan, I'm going to tell you something you may or may not have known. We believe there's truth in all religions. We do. We say that, and that's written in our doctrine. A lot of people don't like it, but it's there. That it's right there. That God reveals God's self in all religions. Also, when we ordain officers, we ask them they have to adhere to the essential tenets of the Reformed faith. What does that mean? The first thing we get asked is, where is it written down so I can see what they are? Well, that's the point. They aren't written down. They're not written down. That's for you to read and discover for your own self what the essential tenets for you are. So I am squarely in my, that I could do this. The other reason I do it is because I believe I am a son of Ibrahim. Does anybody know who Paul was? No, wrote a lot of books of the New Testament. Well, did he ever give up Judaism? No, he did not. Because he knew that as long as he kept his credentials, he could go in any synagogue and say whatever he wanted. Same with me. I'm honorably retired, which means I'm not an evil person. God is not going to throw me to the deepest pits of hell, which are reserved for Yankees fans and other terrible people like that. I'm an Orioles fan. But I can do that, and I can have dialogue. I write a weekly article for an online called Shia PAC, which is a Shia Political Action Awareness Committee. And my editor is a young Iraqi Shia woman who lives in Dearborn, Michigan, who, 28 years old, my gosh, this woman has had a life experience. Her family was chased out of Iraq before the Kuwait War, and she lost, both sides of the family had several people executed. But what she says is, to be a Shia Muslim means you engage in the protest and welcoming all exploited people, whether they're African Americans here in the United States or women in Russia. If you're a Shia, that should bother you, and you should not go to sleep at night. Sunnis aren't so much that way, but the Shia are. They are. They want to look for that. They also want to look at things like economic, that Karl Marx is right about one thing. History is moved by economics. Whether we like it or not, that is true. Last thing I want to say about this too is, my Iranian friends also told me something I didn't know, and this is why you need to learn the history of the winners. They said, well, Khomeini was not really the father of the Iranian Revolution, like you Americans think. I said, really? Who was? Have you ever heard of Dr. Ali Shariati? Anybody ever heard of him? Well, I had neither. He was a sociologist who wrote a lot of things, Fatima is Fatima, the Hajj, and it's religion versus religion. And here's what it is. He went to the University of Paris, got his PhD, studied under Jean-Paul Sartre, the great French existentialist philosopher. And let me tell you who Shariati's, this is in the 1950s, study buddies were. They're also studying under. One was Che Guevara. Know who he was? Franz Fanon. Che Guevara, he was the Latin American revolutionary from Bolivia who was active in both the Cuban Revolution and the Algerian Revolution. In that group was Franz Fanon. Anybody know who he was? He was French-born in Martinique, gave up his citizenship, father of the Algerian Revolution. Now, Sartre was a committed atheist, and he was so moved by these people of religion who were doing interfaith stuff. They were Muslim and two Christians. Sartre wrote, were I to have a God, I would choose Shariati's God, meaning he would be a Shiite Muslim. Why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because I think that interfaith dialogue is the way of the future. One of the smartest people I know, and I really am going to stop here now, is a guy named Dr. Sayyid Hossein Nasser, who is Iranian-born. He is professor of Islamic studies at George Washington University in D.C. Very old now. He is the father of a school called perennial philosophy. I'm going to tell you what that is. You need to know that because that is going to be the new interfaith philosophy. Nasser came to the United States in the 40s, went to Petty School. He was a devout Shiite. Then he went to MIT, where he got a job, where he got a degree in physics. So he's a scientist. Then he went on to Columbia, got his PhD in Islamic and Persian literature. 1958, went home and opened up the philosophy department at the University of Tehran. Was out of the country in 1978 when the revolution got stuck here in the United States. What it basically says is, what Dr. Nasser says is, there is the primordial truth, which is the basis of all religions in the world. So we're going to say, well, no, let's go back and get that primordial truth, and then we'll have one religion. You can't do that. Because the primordial truth is infinite. We're finite. We can't even understand it. But the primordial truth has been revealed to Greek philosophers, to Hindus, to Buddhists, to Gnostics, then to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And they all have the same truth. And they all are going to the same summit. And it is the newest interfaith dialogue, and the African American Muslims here in this country are using it because it also pulls in the African animist religions that Africans had before they were Muslims, Native American spirituality, which is deep. And what my Hawaiian friends say, yeah, we believe that. Yeah, what did you say that was? We've been believing that for thousands of years. Yeah, we get that. But Google it, perennial philosophy. George, I'll send you some web links and you can give it to people.
Thank you.
Anyhow, I know you might want to ask questions, but you're Americans, you're an American religious group, you have contact with difference. Get to know African American Muslims. Get to know American Muslims. I believe that they're the ones that are going to convince all of us what this truth is, and God help us if Donald Trump gets elected. Because let me tell you, and I am starting to worry about that. I'm going to tell you, I lived in Scotland for 2 years. The idiot has no idea what's going on in Scotland. Look at his golf courses. He doesn't get it. But if he wins, and what scares me more than him is all the people that are going to vote for him. We're in trouble. And it's not just Muslims that are worried about it. Everybody ought to worry about it. So, questions?
Yeah, I've been doing a little studying.
And George, you stop me when we need to stop, okay? I'm going to let you do that.
Well, why don't we make about 4 or 5 questions?
All right.
And when people are asking questions, I don't want them to make them real long statements of what they believe.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, this is a fellowship. We don't listen to that. We don't have rules. We make up our own rules.
It's all right.
And I'm really studying the Muslim tradition. I was born Eastern Orthodox, so.
Which communion?
On Granby Street.
Greek Orthodox. Okay.
Right. And so, I went to Bible school, but then I realized when I was walking in the woods, in the forest, when I was a Boy Scout, I said, God, this is so beautiful. If I can ever be an instrument of your peace, I want to be a part of that. And I've always had a dialogue with God. So that's the essence of what it is. I noticed that somehow when the people were getting the oil, they created the 7 sisters, and they made the Saudi Arabia had a special interest in getting his imam to talk about that specific type of Islam.
They're Wahhabis, is
The
what they call them.
Wahhabis, right.
Right.
And it was like a militant style.
Right.
And this is where most of that violence comes from. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Again, I never like to criticize, but the Saudis will tell you we're pure Arabians. Everybody else just Arabs. And they have a lot of money, which I can argue all day long that are they using you're supposed to use your money if you're Muslim for the benefit of others. I'm not sure they are. Now, they are sweating bullets right now, and they should be, because we're going to be buying Iranian oil here before long, and after that, Cuban oil, with some of the best, next year this time, gas is going to be $1 a gallon. I'm not kidding you. You wait. The best light crude. Iraq has 500 years of light crude oil left. Saudis only have 100 years. That's it. And they're a single commodity economy, just like Russia. I give the House of Saud 5 years before they're out of here, because they acted very un-Islamically. Ask other Muslims; they'll tell you that they're in trouble. Now, listen. One of the things that Muhammad came to do was, one of the practices of the pre-Islamic Arabs is there were too many baby girls, so they buried baby girls alive. Muhammad said, no, women are God's people too. And it's just like when Catholicism started, the first 6 centuries of the Christian church, women and men were equal. Well then, in the 7th century, Catholics imposed Roman patriarchalism and made it what it is. Same thing happened in Islam. Let me just tell you this too. If you read the Islamic laws of inheritance, it created a middle class. It did, because women inherited the same as men. And what happened was, when the French came to Algeria in 1830, that wasn't fun, and the British came to the Raj in India in 1767, said, oh my gosh, this is a middle class. We cannot compete with this economy. We got to squash that and add primogeniture. You know what primogeniture was? The oldest male got everything. Kind of like Reagan did with the tax cuts for the wealthy. Reagan wiped out the middle class here. So my point is, you got to go to the Quran, not just what people say the Quran says, because you will find the equality. Saudi Arabia has not just one Disney World, but 2. One for men, one for women. I don't know if I answered your question, but
the violence that's coming, how can we get the Muslims to stand up and speak about that in a way that is heard to the multitudes of us, because we're not hearing it?
African American Muslims are doing that. They are doing that, and they're getting and they can do it. Let me tell you, and the U.S. government is on this. I told you about Masjid Mohammed in Washington. It used to be that the Saudi embassy taught English to the children of all Arabic-speaking diplomats in D.C. Well, 2 years ago, President Obama stopped that. They now, because they were getting this Wahhabi teaching in the Saudi embassy, now Arabic children of Muslim diplomats go to the African-American mosque I told you about. That's where they learn English.
Okay.
And that because they're learning English from loyal Americans who happen to be Muslim, and that's what we want. And see, Fox News isn't going to tell you that. I promise you, they're not going to tell you that. They're not going, they're not going to do anything, tell you anything that President Obama has done. He's done many great things. You're not going, but that's true.
Okay, thank you.
I got a quick question. These terrorists are saying, they kill somebody to get to see the 72 versions. Can you explain that to me? What do you mean by that?
Oh, that's just as mythological as Roman Catholic doctrine of purgatory. Nowhere in the Quran. No. See, look, let me tell you. All church doctrine is political. We talked about Gnosticism, Gnostic Christianity. Why did Gnostic Christianity lose out to Catholicism? Do you know why? It's because the Gnostic Jesus said, "Come to me. I will teach you the truth, and you'll be free." Well, that's true that you don't need the church anymore, do you? The same thing, this 72 virgins nonsense, some obscure group of Sunni Islam said put that. Everybody thinks it's in the Quran. It is not. It's just and it's just something that popped up to somebody could protect the just like the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the empire, not because he loved Christians. He needed to unify the empire, but he messed it up. He screwed it up royally, and that's what a lot of these 72 virgin things, what they do. So I don't know exactly where it came from, but that's where it is.
So what's the Muslim community doing about it?
Sorry?
So what is the Muslim community doing about it? They say, hey, that's not the way it is, the way it's supposed to be.
Well, they're saying that, and slowly, so you're not going to get the news of what's happening in Muslim communities, but it's working more and more. And I was at a mosque on Wednesday night, which is here in Virginia Beach, which is basically an immigrant mosque, not like the African American one I go to more often. The immigrants are feeling bolder now here in the United States to talk about what is wrong back from where they came from. But what you said was what probably came from the teaching of Sheikh Wahab, who was the sheikh who came from the empty quarter in what you now know as Saudi Arabia, born in 1703, around the same year as Jonathan Edwards, which I think is just so funny. But anyhow, and who created that stuff, to keep them in power. If we had 3 more days, we could talk about also that every war in the 20th century was fought because of the bad job the people did at the end of World War I. They redrew the map of the modern Middle East and Africa to suit not African and Arab wishes and desires, but European desires. In every war that has happened, World War I comes from that. And people should listen to Woodrow Wilson, who said, let's let the people decide what they want.
Well, he pulled out the League of Nations.
That's right. Well, League of Nations was much better since the UN. Woodrow Wilson was a Presbyterian. You may or may not have known that. And he was told, oh, Woodrow, look, you just an upstart Yank. Go back across the pond. We men, they were men from Paris and London. We know how to run the world. We'll fix it up. And they drew... There's the nation you know as Iraq has no reason to be together. It makes no sense. Syria, no sense. They ignore the historic people that are there. And so all these doctrines that are ascribed to Islam have nothing to do with the religion, but everything to do with political situations. The same thing is true of Christianity. I mean, that African American slavery was defended in the South by the Bible. But what you don't know is, do you know how Wall Street got to be Wall Street? Anybody know? How?
Keep the pigs out.
Well, Wall Street was called Wall Street because slaves were made to build a wall because they're afraid of invasion. But Wall Street banks are Wall Street banks because during the slave trade, they financed the slave trade. Wall Street insurance companies became great insurance companies because they came south and wrote insurance policies for runaway slaves. And I can tell you that as late as 1880, Boston shipping companies were still transporting slaves from West Africa to the Caribbean, not here. But and in the name of business, a blind eye was turned. So all that, I tell my northern friends, I love you, but you're just as hypocritical as we southerners are, because you all made a fortune financing the slave trade. No, you didn't have slaves. And what I'm saying is all of that was defended in the name of religion. One other thing, after the Civil War ended, before the Civil War, 9% of the population might have been African. After the Civil War, 22%. Well, Northern churches started something called the African Colonization Society. Do you know what that is? Anybody ever heard of that? We're going to take these freed Africans and help them get back to Africa because that's home. And they didn't want to leave. This was their home. This was their home. And as they were doing that, after the Civil War, they were said, all right, we'll welcome immigrants, preferably northern and western, eastern and southern. You can stay in Europe. But all that was defended by the Christian faith.
Yes, the Quran, to the best of your memory, does it have, anything in there that says anything about murdering or killing anybody that isn't of their faith?
It does not. In fact, he read no coercion. No, that now some people teach that, but listen. I mean, there are lots of things that are done in the name of Christianity that people believe is somewhere in the Bible. Like the Lord helps those who help themselves. That's not in the Bible. But no.
That wasn't.
The answer to your question is no.
It wasn't about the New Testament of the Holy Bible.
No is the answer to your question. No. There's nowhere in that says in the Quran to kill infidels. No.
Why are they doing it?
You tell me. I have no idea.
Question over here. She's had her hand raised for a while.
I have a curiosity about what is the basic perennial truth that you speak of?
What is the what now?
The basic perennial truth that you're speaking of.
A guy named Fritz Schuoff wrote a book in the 1940s called Perennial Philosophy. You just need to read the books. What Dr. Nasser, a Muslim, says, the oldest religion, the oldest echo of the perennial truth is in Hinduism. That's what he says. Contrary to popular belief, Hindus only worship one God too. They do. There are lots of incarnations of that God, and there are lots of avatars, meaning those times, but there's only one God. And what Professor Nasser says is the earliest echo would be found in Hinduism. That's the earliest echo. I'm gonna send it to George tomorrow. I'll do that. I'll be glad to do that. There's a great website that'll take you to other links, and I'll get that.
I'll post it on the fellowship Facebook page.
Thank you. Or our website.
And the website.
Did you ask a question?
Yes, sir. I'm going to start with, it's very ironic that one of the top 5 oil-rich nations in the world, Iraq and Syria, are the most poorest, and it's because it's being stolen from by their own people of other countries. But what I'm getting at is, back in the 80s, during the Cold War, the whole Cold War, we used to compete with Russia over who can bring the most economic prosperity to these third world nations. And we don't do that anymore. And when ISIS took over the world's largest producing oil well, they were making a lot of money. So, and the people who were around were starving. It was drought, there was no food, no water. So they were saying they had to feed their children somehow. So they're saying, you join us and we'll give you food and water to feed your children. So my question is, do you know of any organizations, NGOs, or government organizations that are supplying food and water to Syria?
Well, the Red Crescent is there, but Syria really doesn't have any oil. They really don't. Let me tell you why. Because what you now know as Mosul in the north of Iraq, where there's a lot of oil, that's a historic part of Syria. That's really more Syria than it is Iraqi. But after World War I, the British got Iraq and the French got Syria, and the British didn't want France to have all that oil, so they cut the north of Iraq off oil and put it in there. So there really isn't any oil in Syria. Syria has no oil well.
In Iraq, they took over the oil well in Iraq. That was the largest oil.
Right. Right.
And because of that, ISIS has so much money. So, and everybody around them is, of course, they're starving. So they.
But the Iraqi forces retook Fallujah yesterday. Did you know that? They retook Fallujah, and they're headed to Mosul in the north of Iraq, which is where that big oil refinery is. ISIS is fading out. Let me tell you why they're fading out. Because they're not Islamic. Do you know where they get their inspiration? You're going to love this. Do you have any idea? The Christian Crusades. That's exactly what the French, and they just went around killing, stealing land that wasn't theirs. It's exactly what ISIS has done. People, and watch, say, this has never happened before. Yes, it has. And we did it. When I say we, those of us that were Christian. But there are Shia relief organizations. This woman I was telling you about, who lives in Dearborn, Michigan, she goes back home once a year at a great risk. and brings aid relief to orphanages, all these children that do not have, and I support her work. I do that. She's very brave, and she can do it because she's a U.S. citizen now. Yeah, we got to.
Time to. Oh,
yep.
Lloyd in the back of the soundboard wanted to make sure he could get his question in.
All right.
Some of it was never for other people, but I have just one question. The statistics are there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world currently, and only a tiny, tiny fraction, usually quoted as 1%, are of a jihad mentality. I'd like to address the 99% that are totally reasonable, accommodating, peace-loving people. And to the best of your knowledge, what is their opinion of the activities of the jihadist bunch? Do they silently endorse it, although they don't want to get involved? Or do they silently repudiate it and consider it as genocidal psychopath behavior? And in either case, why are they so silent on their opinion?
Let me answer your first question. 2009, the last church I served, we resettled a refugee family from Baghdad, Iraq to Virginia Beach. They were Shia Muslim, mother, father, 2 children. He worked for the U.S. military, and his job was to hire civilian personnel for Camp Victory. A job description was like, do not let Al-Qaeda get a job. Do not want the 1%, on a U.S. military base. They found him out. They burned their house in Baghdad, killed their animals. The family was rushed out to Richmond, and we brought them to Virginia Beach. When they came here, I said, look, I respect your religion. I'm not here to drag you to the baptismal. I've got a friend who's an imam from Mosque in Norfolk. I'll take you there. I said, no, we want to go to the church. After the first year that they were here, I asked them, I said, what has surprised you most about living here? And listen to what she said. She said, what has surprised me most was how much like us you Americans are. Now, I hadn't heard it. I used to, that everyone's, but she said, you all are really, I said, what do you mean, Maha? Well, you love your children. You take care of your family. You do. I said, that's what we do. The 99%. The 99%. The 1%, I don't know. I mean, why does Westboro Baptist Church do what it does? I can't speak for it, but I will tell you this. The Arabic word jihad does not mean holy war. That's been a hijacked word. There's another Arabic word that means that. What jihad means is inward struggle. You struggle with yourself to become one. Tawheed is the Arabic word, one, which is also meaning for light. And then so you have to struggle with yourself. You can't worry about anybody else. You can only worry about yourself. So that's what jihad means. Now, people hijack it and make it more than what it is, and I can't explain religious fanaticism. I don't care what tradition it comes from. Last question.
Like with Westboro, and they are fanatical, but the people who are not are very vocal and they protest and they speak. And there's just so many peaceful, loving Muslims. How come they're not more vocal?
They're scared. They're scared. But let me tell you, see, what they're told is, if you go to the United States, we'll follow you. Well, they can't. And see, but our African American Muslims are empowering the immigrants, saying, look, you can't be touched here. You can't. And the immigrant community is becoming bolder. They are. And that's why, they're following the lead of the African American community. I'll tell you this young woman that edits she and I are working on a plan to get African American Muslim communities and Shia communities together. The Shia are very afraid of being here because they think that that we're out to get them, which we aren't. But the more and more they hear from enlightened Shia that no, this is okay, so we just have to wait and see. But what we can't do, we have 2 options. We can either do the hard work and make that happen, or we can vote for Donald Trump. That's really what it is. And for a lot of people, it's easier to vote for Donald Trump and to get rid of people that aren't like us, whatever that means. But anybody who says they want it to be like us, I tell a lot of friends of mine, well, then you need to really be honest and say to yourself, your vision of America is Anglo-America, which is in the first 100 years, which was white and was Protestant. You know, you need to be honest with yourself. That's what it is. But let me just, my ADD is really kicking in now. You know, Trump can complain about immigrants all he wants. The fact of the matter is, we need it. We absolutely do. The state of California is the 4th largest economy in the world, and they would not have a workforce unless they had all the Hispanic workforce, documented, undocumented. We lived in Austin, Texas in 1995, 1999. They were in the boom. And what would happen, you would notice that all of a sudden, all the building and construction stopped. Then you'd hear on the Austin News that INS had come in, round up all the undocumented workers and sent them back to Laredo, back to Mexico. Well, guess what? And an Austin lawyer who's in the church I serve told me this. That always happened 2 days before payday. So what's happening is these American contractors lured them over the border, and before they had to pay them, they made an anonymous phone call to INS. That's what was really happening. So, you know, people can gripe about, but no. You know, we need to be honest. We need that. But we are a nation of immigrants. And my Native American friends say, we're immigrants too. We just came from Siberia about 18,000 years before y'all did.
But I have no problem with that. The only problem I have is that the terrorists over there already said they're going to migrate with the immigrants coming over. So how are we going to do that? That's my view.
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But I'm not willing to sacrifice our rights. I mean, the American Revolution. One of the things that's fought on that British troops didn't come into your house and go through your bail. Yeah, and I'm just not willing to sacrifice rights for fear. I'm just not.
So are you having this, did you start getting involved in showing an interest in Muslim and Islamist? I think you said it was in 2012?
Oh, no. Oh, since the 1970s when I was in college. Oh.
What was the 2012?
Oh, that's when my wife and I happened to be in Washington, and we were at it was Black History Month. I went to the Smithsonian and saw that Quran that came.
So are you having this talk out of desperation because you're basically telling everybody we have no choice but to get along, otherwise we're screwed?
I had this with you all because you all, what I read on your website, you're not hostile to interfaith experience. I couldn't do this in a Baptist church. I have, but what I tell them is that if a church like that wants to come, I tell them, look, this isn't cable TV. You can't have me come in 45 minutes and figure out everything. If you want to have me for 10 weeks, I'll come to your church. But I'm not doing. But I would do a one-shot deal for y'all because I read your website. So no, what I have said would whoop over their Baptist heads. They would have never gotten it because they are convinced that Islam is a different God than what Christians are. That's what they believe. That's where they are, and it isn't. It is not. You know, so I didn't think you all need to hear about the 5 pillars. I didn't think you all need to hear about you didn't. But I will tell you this: I do believe that the slave trade. You got to remember, 1492. We say, oh, that's the year that Columbus discovered America. If you're a Muslim, 1492 is a terrible year. You know why? That's the year that Muslim Spain was defeated by Ferdinand and Isabella. And the myth is Isabella pawned her jewels to finance Columbus's trip. No, she didn't. They stole them from the treasure of the last Umayyad Caliph. Now, if I had time, I could tell you that what we now know as Western education did not come from monasteries in Western Europe. It came from Baghdad, Iraq, and Muslim Spain. Let me tell you why. The oldest 4 universities in the English-speaking world are Oxford, Cambridge, University of St. Andrews, the University of Paris, which is not English, in Paris. Now, in 1100 AD, when those universities were started, there might have been one library in the city of Paris and one library in all of London. But in Muslim Spain, there was a library in every corner, every street corner. The earliest faculties of those universities were Muslim Aristotelians from Spain. Nobody knows that. See, that's that history of the losers. But you know, so I think, you know, when Ferdinand and Isabella made Spain Christian, I believe that the slave trade began as a continuation of the Christian Crusades because, huh?
We're out of time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.